Hi, thanks for tuning in. Let's start today with a question. Which news outlets do you trust? Which news sources do you think that even if you don't always agree with them, they're genuinely on the up and up, or generally reporting the facts rather than the opinions? Please let me know in the comments below, because this is a very important question and one that is not asked often enough. That's Matt behind the camera. I'm Ben. We've got Agent Scully and the rest of the crew back here in the abyssal plains behind me, which means we are finally back with a brand new episode of Stuff They Don't Want You to Know. The reason that we're asking about the news is because it's a huge deal, and it changes depending on what part of the world you're in. You've probably heard about those, I think, tragic photos people have taken where you see all the Time magazines from different countries, and every one reporting some incredibly important international event, save for the Time magazine issued in the United States, which has, a celebrity plastered over it, and they did something, which is apparently a big deal. So this brought us to another, maybe even bigger question. Does the media report the news, or does the media create the news? And if it's a matter of degree, then where do most people fall on this spectrum? The answer is disturbing and surprising. Some of our more cynical viewers have said, well, every time the media all of a sudden only reports a celebrity, that means they're covering up something they don't want you to know. And as cynical as that is, in some cases, historically, it is probably true. It's no secret that news outlets, especially the ones that are for-profit, have corporate sponsors. They have people on the boards with their fingers in other industrial pies. They have a relationship, maybe cooperative, maybe subservient, with the government of the country in which they are based. And does this mean that they, for these reasons, can't always tell you a story, even if it's important, even if it affects you today, even if it affects your family today, the country you live in for ages past? And it's a little dramatic, but it's actually happened. Here are 5 recent examples of media stories that have been suppressed. Now, keep in mind, by suppressed, we don't mean that they are absolutely inaccessible. We just mean that they are not being as covered as widely as many other stories that people could argue are much more entertainment and much less journalism. Number 1, even if you don't live in the United States, you have heard of the Patriot Act. Despite the great name and the great marketing, there's a great debate about what it is actually intended to do. And does it help people? And if so, whom? This controversial bill is widely opposed by various demographics in the U.S., and it was set to have an expiration date. After time, provisions of this Patriot Act would expire. This is not an unusual thing in U.S. politics. It's called sunsetting. Again, brilliant name, great marketing, guys. There were various senators who said, due to classified reasons that the average John or Jane Q public cannot know, this bill is a fundamental piece of national security. There were other people who said, well, if you're not going to tell us why we can't know it or what it's going to do, then why should we have to vote for it? Oh, and also pay for it. So while we were hearing stories about various celebrities and their opinions on other celebrities' opinions or whatever, this bill came down to a filibuster. And the story, when it was reported, and it has been, was reported as a victory for those who are opposed to the Patriot Act, because it was sunset. However, that wasn't the only act in play. The Senate pushed through something else called the U.S. Freedom Act, which has a complex acronym that maybe we can show on the screen somewhere. Okay. And this was a bill that was advertised, marketed, you might say, as something that sets the Patriot Act down and gets rid of some of those pernicious revisions. However, not everyone agrees with that, and some people are saying that the Freedom Act might just be the Patriot Act in another suit. 2, and let me just put my opinion here at the top, this is one that is more important to me. The FBI has been found, due to some Freedom of Information Act requests, to be using front companies to fly surveillance planes over places in the continental U.S. So we're talking about planes flying in circles over Baltimore. Different companies owning these planes, functioning as front companies for the FBI. And here's the thing, a lot of these companies have the same website, have the same stock images of people who are supposedly like the CEOs or the CFOs or whatnot. And that's how people caught on to the story, apparently. They started looking into these companies and they said, hey, how can like the same 12 people be models on stock image sites and in charge of all these companies? Good question. And let's call this next one 2A, like a little subset. There are other surveillance techniques, things called with names like Stingray, and then there are persistent surveillance systems. These techniques, this technology is not just being sold to federal level officials, it's also being sold to your local police department, possibly. 3, and this is something that you have probably heard about. You're definitely familiar with this. If you have flown into or out of the U.S., then you have, and well, if you've done it in recent years, you've had to deal with the TSA. And it's a huge pain. Let me make my opinion here known. One time I was flying a plane and I had like a bottle of shampoo or something. And they say, Ben, you can't take that shampoo on board. And I said, why? Well, it could be possibly used as an explosive. And I said, I get that, sure, okay. And hand it over because you can't take it with you. And then they toss it into a bin of a bunch of other shampoo bottles. And it's like, what are we building, a giant explosive here in a barrel? Well, anyhow, turns out that if I were to try to sneak something illicit onto a plane, my chances of getting past the TSA are pretty good. A Department of Homeland Security investigation found that 95% of the mock weapons and fake explosives they tried to pass through the TSA got through. That means the TSA, whose one job is to do this thing, did it 5% of the time. Specifically, 67 of the 70 times they attempted this. 4. A declassified report from the Pentagon essentially said that the U.S., Western countries, and Turkey were working with Al-Qaeda and ultimately led to the creation of ISIS. This has been suspected for a long time, but no one has confirmed it from that source. And now it's out there. You can Google it, you can find it. This is a question that came up when we talked about ISIS in the past, was did Western countries purposefully create ISIS? And that is not exactly what this report says, but what it does say is that they were supporting Al-Qaeda along with some other people, and that they thought it might turn into a proxy war with Russia, China, and Iran on one side and the West on the other, and the battleground being Syria. But of course, I don't know, Justin Bieber or someone, right, might have bought some new shoes. Who knows? 5. The White House is under increased pressure to declassify 28 redacted pages from the 2002 report on the events of September 9/11. These pages have acquired almost a mythic status, right, in the wake of the events of September 9/11. Well, what do they say? According to The Telegraph, a former senator and chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, a fellow named Bob Graham, says that these 28 pages show how the government or factions of Saudi Arabia were the primary financiers for the attacks on the World Trade Center in September 2001. And to be fair, we don't know what it says. Only a few people do. Only the people who were able to read those blacked out, almost 30 pages of a report on this disaster. And these are by far just the very surface of something that people believe is a widespread and common phenomenon. And this brings us back to the question we asked at the very top. What gives? Why is this happening? Is it because people watching the news really only want to know about, what clothing a celebrity was wearing at a gala or something, or what they think about someone else's new mixtape, or what their reaction to another public statement is? Or is it because members of the media have moved from reporting the news to shaping it. Thanks so much for watching. If you'd like to hear more about media manipulation, check out our audio podcast, which Matt and I do with our super producer, Noel Brown. I think he's got a different nickname every time. So if you have any ideas for a nickname, I hope you don't regret asking this. Let us know in the comments below. And if you want to drop us a line, you can find us on Facebook, you can find us on Twitter. We're Conspiracy Stuff at both of those. We would like to hear what stories you think have been suppressed or underreported and why, either in the comments below, somewhere in the social media world, or you can email Matt and I directly. We are conspiracy@howstuffworks.com.